Hey, Jackie Jean here, and are you new to Lightroom? Because if you are, this video is going to be good for you because it's going to cover the basic tools on how to get started with editing. Check it out. Okay, so we've now imported some of the images and gone from the library to now develop. So in the develop stage, I want to just cover the tools and functions before we actually jump into editing in the next few videos. All right, so as far as the layout, we've got everything open in here. This is the navigator. This is kind of a preview window right here. This is if you do have presets, this is where you will find them on the left side. And we're going to come over here to cover our tools. So we've got our basic. Go ahead and bring these down, that way we can kind of go over each one. All right, so our basic. So this is going to cover white balance. There is auto that you can do. I tend to stay away from auto because it's not the best judge of, as you can see when I selected that, it's just not the greatest judge of where an image needs to be. So I definitely recommend staying in the custom white balance. You can adjust the temperatures. If you need to make it warmer, bringing up that yellow, cooler, over to the blue. Again, we've got the magenta and the green slider right there. So you can adjust the white balance. And scroll down, we're still staying in that basic area. And we can adjust the exposure, contrast, highlights. So this is a great tool to use if you, let's say this is how it was out of camera and then you've kind of lost those details in the white, so it's like just blown and overexposed. The cool thing about highlights is you can bring down highlights, and a lot of times you're able to recover those details in the whites. So bringing down the slider on the highlights. There's shadows. You can deepen shadows, lighten them up. And again, the whites, you can actually recover those just like in the highlights. Bring those down or up, and bring those blacks on the slider, deepen that down, or lighten them up. All right, so we've got presence now, and in presence we've got clarity. That over sharpens it quite a bit. I don't recommend going too crazy with it because it does go a little bit too much. And if you go in the opposite direction, it reduces clarity and just really adds a lot of haze to the image. Again, you don't want to go too extreme one or the other. There's the dehaze right there. It kind of adds contrast and sharpens at the same time. This is great if you were to, let's say, shoot in like the bright sunlight or even in the golden hour and you've got a little bit of haze. This is a good tool to use because it's a natural dehazer. Vibrance, I don't use this too much, but it will bring all the colors and make them more vibrant. It's kind of like the saturation tool. And saturation, you can see right there. Saturation is a little bit more heavy on the colors, while vibrance just makes them a little bit more vibrant and pop out as far as the colors. So that are the basic tools right there. We've got the white balance, changing exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and saturation. These are like just the basics that you'll do on an image. All right, so we're going to go to our next one. This is tone curve. I use curves a lot in Photoshop. So when they did add this to Lightroom, I was super excited because now I actually edit more in Lightroom just because it has that option. All right, so this midpoint, I've got my channel at RGB. Let me show you right here too. So there's linear, medium contrast, and strong contrast options. So you might, if you open Lightroom, it might be on another one of those settings, and I suggest setting it to custom. and then going to RGB. And so this middle point right here is the midtones. If you raise it up and to the left, it's gonna, as you can see, increase that exposure over all the image. So the midtones bringing everything up. If you bring this point down and to the right, it's gonna lower that exposure and darken everything. All right, so let's say I'm just gonna brighten that exposure a little bit. Well, I'm gonna come up here to the right top side, and this section over here actually controls the highlights. So this is all the highlights over here, as you can see. Kind of notice that image right there. So if I want to bring down the highlights, I would bring that point, create a point and bring it down. I want to bring up the highlights, I would bring it in the opposite direction, up and to the left. Don't want to do too much to my highlights, so I'm just going to leave that point there as an example. And now we're going to create another point, which is going to be down here on the left. And this down here is going to create more shadows. So this covers the shadows, this covers the midpoint, and this covers the highlights. So we're going to go back to the shadows and lower it. So lowering it to the right, that's going to create more shadows, more richness. If you want to lessen the shadows, then we're going to go up. All right, so if you've ever heard of someone saying, I created an S-curves, this is basically what it is. It's adding that highlight point, creating that mid-level point right there where you increase the exposure, and then create another, that third point in the shadows to add a bit of contrast and deepen those shadows. There we go. Now, in some of the more advanced edits, we'll cover the red, green, and blue channel, but for now we're just going to stay in RGB. All right, now we're going to go over here, and this is going into each color. So we've got hue, saturation, and luminance. So hue right here, like if you have, let's see, we've got the blues, we've got a lot of blue right there. So the blues are going to, this is going to change the hue of the blues. So you can go into each color and adjust it. All right, so saturation, I'm going to stay on those blues as an example, increasing the saturation or decreasing it. Again, you can do that with all of the colors. And so here is the luminance, and this is going to raise the brightness of that color. There we go. So I've got it on HSL, and then you got color right here. So if you want to go to each individual color this way, or have it open like that, where the menu shows everything, which I choose to do. Usually so that way it makes it a little bit easier to see everything. All right, split toning. Again, going in, let's see, well, let's find our blues again. And increasing that saturation. Now this is covering just the colors in the highlights and shadows right here, and this is covering just in the shadows. When we were up here in the colors, this is just specifically making that adjustment to the color and not really affecting the highlights or the shadows, kind of like the midtones too, I would say, but the split toning specifically targets the highlights and the shadows. All right, next we've got detail. The detail is you can sharpen, kind of zoom, find a point that you want to zoom at. I tend to not go too crazy on the sharpening because when you sharpen too much, you're going to get a lot of grain. So we're just going to keep that sharpening down about 25, and I usually keep everything else as a default because it does a really good job at it. And go down to noise reduction. So if you have a lot of noise in an image, again, I don't recommend going over too much with the noise reduction just because it really does cover a lot of the textures and details and gets rid of those as well. But this is a good, if you just kind of want a nice little finish and a nice polish, again, leaving that detail and contrast. I usually leave the default where it is and just increase the luminance just a little bit, around 18 to 20. All right, so we've got lens corrections right here. I don't usually mess with this, so I'm just gonna, if you've got chromatic abrasion, you can add that in there. Don't usually transform or add anything to this, just because I don't want to, as you can see, I'm kind of showing you that example. I really don't want to mess with my images like this. So, all right, and if you ever do anything that you don't like, just click that reset button right there and it'll take you back. All right, effects. Now I do use this sometimes. There's the vignette. If you go this way, there's that light vignette. There's the darker vignette. It is pretty harsh. If you want to add some feathering, then it blends it a little bit more and reduces that harshness of it. And change the midpoint of where it starts. And this changes the shape of it. Reset that. And grain, if you like grain, you can add grain for that filmy look. I would suggest staying probably in between 10 and 20 with it. All right. So that, I hope, will give you kind of an idea. So when we do go in to really editing, this is where you're going to find the basic tools and functions of where we're going to start. Now we're going to cover some of these tools in the next video before we do dive into the more post-processing. Want to see more videos? Be sure to click the subscribe button and turn on those notifications. Thanks.